Some of my research was in a declassified CIA document.
We're here to talk about how to literally grow a new brain. And this is something that you've done, and you've written your book about how to grow a new brain.
I had a dead liver, heart full of holes, and dead parasites in my brain. I knew I could get a new liver, maybe even a new heart, but it's hard to find a good brain these days.
Today's guest was one of the youngest neuroscience professors in the country until the limits of the microscope hit, and he traveled to the Amazon to study how indigenous shamans grew their brain without modern medicine. He later founded the Four Winds Society, now the leading school for energy medicine, and has written over 25 best-selling books blending neuroscience and ancient recipes to regenerate a new brain.
You live in the Amazon, you've got to be a biologist. Shamans were the first biologists. So I reverted back to what I learned in the Amazon. We looked at the sacred plants. The sacred plants all turn out to be switch on more than 1,100 genes that create health and silence about 600 genes within 24 hours that create disease.
Are the plants actually hacking us?
You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey.
We're here to talk about how to literally grow a new brain. And this is something that you've done, I know, because we're friends. And you've written your book about, how to grow a new brain. So what does that mean?
Well, you don't need to understand how to grow a new brain because it's happening all the time. You grow a new brain every 22 days. It's like somebody saying to you, you cannot have the new BMW, but you got to stay with the 2002 one, but we're going to replace every component in it, the tires and the carburetor and everything, the fenders because you cannot grow any new neurons except in the hippocampus where they're stem cells. But the rest, the neurons you're born with, you die with, but you exchange every component part, the mitochondria, all the organelles, every 22 days. So you cannot do that on potato chips, You got to get the neuronutrients. You got to understand what goes through the blood-brain barrier, what doesn't. And that's what I learned in the Amazon, is what they understood intuitively. They couldn't explain it. They couldn't talk about NRF2 activation and detox processes and how you're missing lithium orotate that everybody should be taking now. But they knew the plants had it. They knew and I wanted to know how they knew that curare, which is what they used to paralyze monkeys that are 100 feet up in a tree with a blowgun. And then they put it in the palm of your hand. And I asked them, what's this chewing gum you put in my hand? They said, no, that's curare. And I dropped it. They said, it only works if it touches your bloodstream. And it has 7 herbs in it. I go, how did you learn this? And he said, the plants taught us. Where you open your heart to yourself to begin with, accept yourself, accept your mortality. Then you're showing your infinity. The plant medicine does that. It shows you that you continue way beyond this biological. This is like a rental car, you got to return it someday, but you're going to keep going. And that heals the fear. When that heals the fear, that's what I was looking for in the lab. Then you create psychosomatic health. Because you're not producing the stress molecules. You're not triggering the cortisol and adrenaline in the hippocampus. The learning center is full of cortisol receptors, so you're not damaging. You can have a new experience. You can fall in love with life and with yourself again.
And that comes from growing a new brain, in part anyway. You mentioned the hippocampus, and I know that one of your earlier books, you actually co-wrote it with David Perlmutter, who's been on the show multiple times, who's a dear friend and a brain expert. And what I've learned over this time is you can grow hippocampal neurons, and we have plenty of evidence of that. So all this stuff like lion's mane and even some of the psychedelics, that's what they do. But there are a few cases where you might be able to change other parts of the brain, and you might be able to grow neurons throughout the brain. And we're just learning how to do that. In your case, though, you had a little bit of a brain problem. Tell me about what happened to your brain. Because it was not just your hippocampus.
You mean like graduate school, like getting a PhD? Is that?
Yeah, besides graduate school. I'm talking about more like zombie mode, things eating your brain.
Well, I'm an anthropologist. I'm a fellow at the New York Explorers Club, and all the anthropologists there that spend time overseas, viruses are the big problem, and and in any jungle setting in Asia or in Africa or all these places where I've done some work in, and I came back with, there are 5 kinds of hepatitis. I had all 5 of them, and I had parasites in my brain. My heart had holes in it, and my liver was shot. They told me to get on a liver transplant list, and I knew I could get a new liver, but maybe even a new heart, but it's hard to find a good brain these days. So I called David Perlmutter, my friend David, and Mark Hyman, my other friend, and I said, hey guys, what am I going to do? They're mutual friends.
Oh, yeah, Mark's a neighbor. So
I know. So I decided to go in the body. And the liver repairs rapidly, but I did the Western medicine. I killed the parasites with the drugs, but then I had a dead liver, heart full of holes, and dead parasites in my brain that didn't want to go out of the blood-brain barrier. So I reverted back to what I learned in the Amazon, which was how when David Perlmutter and I were in the Amazon, we looked at the sacred plants, not the teacher plants. Those are the psychedelics. The sacred plants all turn out to be NRF2 activators. And NRF2 is the body's premier detox pathway. And it's also what will switch, broccoli, 5-day-old broccoli sprouts, sulforaphane, what will switch on more than 1,100 genes that create health and silence about 600 genes within 24 hours that create disease. All of those plants were natural NRF2 activators, which are like the Navy SEALs. The NRF2 protein sits on the cell membrane, and the minute you get sulforaphane, for example, even turmeric or curcumin, which is much less bioavailable, then they leave the cell membrane to go into the nucleus of the cell, and they start, silencing and switching on the good genes. So epigenetically, we're beginning to modify their expression. So that was so impressive. How did they know that these plants were, the epigenetic par excellence plants? And when you ask the herbalist, they said, they told us. It's like ayahuasca. You got to combine 2 plants. One of them is an MAO inhibitor so that you don't destroy the dimethyltryptamine, the psychedelic part. It's not destroyed in your gut. It allows absorption of the DMT that comes from the chacruna, the other plant. How did they know that? It's like I would scratch my head and, ask ChatGPT, but how the hell did they know this? And then one time I was leaving the jungle, and I was doing kind of a medical residency there, a shamanic internship. And I had a brand new PhD, I remember. And I was telling this group of elders about the butterfly effect, that, the butterfly that flapped its wings in Beijing that caused the storm in the Caribbean. And they said, oh, very good, show us. I go, what do you mean show you? This is quantum physics. He said, no. I had a brand new PhD. You flap your little doctor wings and heal somebody in India. And I said, I can't do that. They said, I can. They knew how to work it. They knew how to work remotely. There's a lot of science and good articles on remote healing, and even the CIA and NAS was doing remote viewing and disabling electronics remotely of the old Soviet Union, and so we're hip to that at kind of government levels, but not at the local practical level, which is where I'm really interested in.
It's funny, as someone who's been on the show, and I'm not going to say who it is because I don't know if she wants me to, she was outed in a 1,000-page book about remote viewing and the history of it with the CIA. and she doesn't practice it anymore, but she was the most effective remote viewer. She's like, I'm not working for these guys. And she quit many, many years ago. But I mean, we're friends. We've talked about this. This is real. And the shamans have been doing it forever, right?
Totally real. In fact, I just did a literature search a couple of days ago and found that some of my research was in a declassified CIA document that they had ended up funding some of my work through a foundation, of course, because they were fascinated by psychedelics long before we were, and by these capabilities of the higher brain, or the neocortex, of the rewiring of the higher brain to have extraordinary human capabilities. But to do that, you'd need certain neuronutrients that were not in our food anymore. You need the tryptophan, you need the serotonin.
Well, you say they're not in our food anymore. I mean, turkey has tryptophan, steak has other amino.
You know, it's interesting because I spent a lot of time in the Southwest, and the Pueblo people in the Southwest were turkey farmers. And they were the peaceful people. If you raised turkeys and you got tryptophan, you didn't want to invade your neighbors. You wanted to go hug them, have a good time with them.
Oh, wow. So you're saying we could like load all the fake vegan food with tryptophan so they would just chill out and stop trying to kill anyone who eats meat?
Yeah, totally.
You didn't say that, I did, but...
Can I use that? I love it because that's the key. You know, a sweet pea today is bred for sweetness and not for tryptophan content. 100 years ago, it had 3 times the amount. And the blood-brain barrier, let me go a little technical here, because our gene, we have a hunter-gatherer genome, evolved 3 million years ago, 1 million years ago. And we were really bad hunters. This kind of great white hunter story was invented by guys. You know, we would occasionally find some roadkill and bring it back home and say to the women, look, girls, look what I brought back, and we have sex now. But we were horrible hunters. So the blood-brain barrier prioritizes for transport. The transport system prioritizes the BCAAs, the leucine, valine, and isovaline, the branched chain amino acids. And it gives less priority to tryptophan, which is abundant in the plant products that are not as abundant today because of farming's tendency to breed for sweetness. So we're getting a lot of the protein we need for protein synthesis in the brain, but we're not getting the tryptophan to be able to, that turns into serotonin that we need to repair the hippocampus, and that we need to turn into melatonin, and that we need to turn into DMT by the pineal gland once we quiet the production of the stress molecules. I know that's quite a trip I took us on, but it's all because of the turkey farmers.
I like that, though. It comes down to aminos, and who would know that, you know, your traditional ancestral foods may really affect societal structure? So are the plants actually hacking us?
We're being hacked. No, it's not the plants, it's the viruses.
It's the viruses. So how does that tie in with turkey and tryptophan?
Well, because the viruses, you know, we consider them our enemies, but 90% of our DNA is fossil record of viruses that our ancestors lived through, you know, smallpox and black plague and things like that. But they were the drivers of evolution. You know, we want to vaccinate so that we can. There are too many viruses to create vaccines for it. We can't. And vaccines are important. You know, I got to work with Jonas Salk for a little bit when I was a graduate student. Yeah. And he developed the Salk vaccine, a polio vaccine, and he gave it away for free. And so there's some amazing things that vaccines have done.
What a clown. He gave it away for free. Did he not know that you could have $1 trillion industry where you force people to buy whatever you want, no liability? Salk doesn't sound that visionary, Alberto. What's going on here?
That's what I asked the guy. You know, I asked him when I knew him. I was a young graduate student. He was an old man. And I asked him, don't you miss being a trillionaire? And he said, no, I really wanted to discover the double helix.
He's like, darn it, Watson and Crick beat me. Bastards.
Yeah, the bastards. So this is and it's going back to the viruses have been driving evolution. And but they're not living or dead. We don't know really what they are, but we know that they're evolutionary drivers, and they either inject themselves to a host. They're parasitic, but they're injecting their DNA, so they're allowing for experimentation, evolutionary experimentation that wouldn't happen. But today, I was listening to Bobby Kennedy a few days ago. He was saying that when his uncle was president, 3% of Americans had chronic diseases. Today, 76% of Americans do. And a lot of the problem we're having is immune related. So if we don't have strong immunity, the viruses are going to accelerate evolution in a way that's not going to be pleasant for us.
It's one of the reasons, the ocean's full of viruses. You go swimming, they're hacking your DNA. And so anytime you look at anything as good or bad, you're probably being childish. So viruses could be good or bad, depending on, even vaccines could be good or bad, depending on which one and your own risk and all that. And some people get really mad when I say that. And if you can show me real, unaltered, truthful evidence that there's a vaccine against cardiovascular disease, I'm pretty sure that I'm interested, but I'm not going to believe it unless I know that it's done with clean science. So they'd have to do a lot of convincing, but I'm open to the idea, even if I'm cautious. And so I would just encourage anyone, don't believe your own BS. How do you avoid believing your own BS, Alberto?
You mean chocolate doesn't work for that cardiovascular stuff?
I mean, it might help a little bit, but I don't think that a chocolate bar a day is going to keep the heart surgeon
No,
away.
I do the chocolate chip. I got to do the chocolate chip. I can't do the bars. But chocolate actually is a Mayan word, chocolatl, and they used to drink it with spice. And anything that has the word atl associated with it, chocolatl, is one of the sacred plants. So they're NRF2 activators, brain food. The fats are amazing brain food. But I think that today we have to become our own chief scientists, because you can't tell what's bullshit anymore. You got to become your own chief scientist, your own medical doctor, your own, for example, peptides. We have amazing peptides available to us in America, but they cannot be patented. Pharma can't take them over. So there's so much misinformation about them, and they're the most extraordinary tools that if we learn how to work with them and work with somebody that can coach us, they can do wonders. I mean, insulin is a peptide. GLP-1 agonist. This is Ozempic. It turns out to protect you from Alzheimer's and protects your kidneys, and you lower your risk of dying from cardiovascular events by 57%. So we gotta really immerse ourselves in the tools that become empowered, and not just follow the latest, hip supplement, but understand the systems. What are the systems how do they work? And not just the molecules and the pathways, which is Western medicine, because the plants have multiple pathways and hundreds of molecules, and but they're synergistic. So we have the wisdom already, and we have the tools for accessing it today. I can ask Chat to give me the 5 botanicals that have the best GLP-1 agonist impact, and I get them in a minute without having to take a semaglutide or GLP-1 peptide. So that's the information is available today. The misinformation, unfortunately, is fear-driven, and we have plant. We grew up with plants. We evolved with the plants, and they're here, including the psych. It turns out that the best extender of average lifespan in mice is psilocybin. You read that research?
No, not about life extension in mice. I saw a life extension one. I didn't realize it was in mice, but that's interesting because there's no placebo there. It's just good for them.
Yeah. Sure. And they put no rock and roll music when they gave it to them.
Oh, man. Are you a fan of using psilocybin to grow a new brain? I mean, you wrote a book about that, but it's not really about psilocybin.
I wrote a book about growing a new brain, and psilocybin is also a serotonin analog. So you find that they all have this indole nucleus, and their binding sites, both ayahuasca, psilocybin, mescaline, they work on psilocybin receptors. on serotonin receptors. So there's something here. And now the longevity studies and the aging studies on mice and psilocybin are showing that it extends lifespan. It reduces mortality. Like the average mortality may be at 50%, but the psilocybin mice live 30% longer. And it's available. Take a look at the science. And it's, so why did the Great Spirit create psychedelics that are in every plant and animal on the planet, and we have receptors for, and they're serotonin receptors? How can we do that? By manufacturing our own ayahuasca. The brain, the pineal gland, that's its only job, is the pituitary gland produces 100 different hormones. The pineal in the higher brain produces only melatonin and methylates serotonin into dimethyltryptamine. So, wow, this is very cool. We didn't know that, 20 years ago.
I remember, I think it was Candace Pert, who's our discoverer of the opiate receptor in humans, and wrote this interesting
the neuropeptides. Yeah.
Yeah. And she was talking about going down and visiting shamans in South America. And so she's this really hardcore, skeptical Western scientific person, as you had to be as a woman in science in the 70s and 80s when she was coming up.
She didn't get the Nobel Prize she should have been included in,
I never got to interview her because she passed before I became aware of her work. But when you read her book, she says that we went down, we talked to all these shamans, and she said, I was trying to explain to them about the opiate receptor in the brain, and they all just started laughing and laughing and laughing. And she's like, what's so funny? And they said, you think those things actually exist?
Yeah.
So here's the question, though. Alberto, you're a shaman. Do they exist?
So you're talking about the nature of reality now. What is real? What is not real? And it's I think that we co-create with spirit, and that that's this material reality, tangible reality is real, but it's only real because you consider it so. If you were to change your ground of beliefs, your presuppositions about the world would mirror that back to you. You become more synchronistic, and more, you would enter a little bit more into what we would call the magical world, and not only the world of causality, of cause and effect.
Is that what you had to do to grow a new brain? I mean, what's it about, taking NRF2, or was this about a mindset or a world set shift in you?
They go together. Shamans were biologists to begin with, and they also knew the invisible world. They gotta go together. So you gotta have the right biology, gotta have the right molecules, and then you have to understand what your maps of reality are, because the universe is so generous that it'll mirror back to you whatever presuppositions you have, deep presuppositions about the nature of reality. See, I don't see private clients anymore, but when I did, I would have people coming into my office with a big stack of diagnoses and labs and cancer results, and I needed to see a golden Buddha walking into my office, because if I saw, a liver cancer, that's what I was going to find. That's what Heisenberg told us about, the electron. Wherever you look for it, that's where you're going to find it. And if I could convince them that they were a living miracle and not a diagnosis, then miracles would begin to happen. Amazing stuff will begin go on. But you gotta find those core beliefs that have been instilled upon us, and then dismantle them.
What percentage of your healing came from food and taking the right supplements or the right plants versus your worldview and your mindset?
See, the problem with that question is you're assuming that 100% is the maximum, If we're working with like a 500% gauge, I say that it's about 200 and 200. The mindset, there's no amount of supplements that are going to override a bad mindset, and no amount of mindset that are going to override a really crappy diet.
Wow. So that was maybe the best answer I've ever heard to a question like that, which is an impossible question to answer. And you got to do both. And it probably depends on the person. If you have a toxic belief system and a good diet, it's going to be 80-20 in one way versus 5. So I 100% agree.
And a month or two later, it could shift. That percentage could shift around. Maybe you get into a relationship because we end up marrying the people we need to learn from and grow with in many ways. And you'd say, well, I got to learn these things about who I believe, my own self-esteem and who I am and what I deserve. And you got to do that work. But you got to clean up your diet too. Yeah.
I so resonate with that. And I look at different times in my life. Certainly mindset's been a thing. And other times where, if you're swallowing a little bit of cyanide every day, wishing that away, you need to be, Jesus level to do that. And I'm not there.
No. You cannot play with mercury, no matter how little the amount is. But the Buddha taught us that thoughts become things. You become what you think. And what the shamans were masters of, they knew how to work with the mechanism of the placebo, which we think is tricking people into that this is a sugar pill. In effect, the placebo works even when the person knows they're getting a placebo. Or the nocebo, like the studies done in New York on voodoo deaths. If somebody thinks that they've been cursed, within 2 weeks they get to pick up a major illness. So the mind is all important. But to really create psychosomatic health, which is what my new book is about, you need to access the higher brain. And because that's the brain of quantum physics, of music, of creativity, and not the Neanderthal limbic brain, which lives in fear and scarcity, no matter how much you have. And then the game gets really interesting.
It gets interesting. It also gets confusing. In your book, you're talking about spirit with a capital S. What are we really talking about?
We're talking about you and I. Spirit, the word spirit comes from breath. And there's a great meditation that I learned with the shamans that when you inhale, you go to silently, I am. And when you exhale, you go, my breath. I am my breath. So when you take that last breath, that last exhalation, you could go off into the quantum field, into infinity, and have only the I am will be with you. So how do you leave this life consciously? How do you get out of this life alive? That's reveals itself, I think, in that higher brain with those neural networks that meditation will take you there, but it's so damn long.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's why my most recent book exists. Like, there's a lot of ways that are faster than just meditating by itself, but there's value in meditating, and some meditations are more valuable than others for certain states, and it's kind of complex. It's like learning how to cook. Like, did you want to cook a steak, or did you want to cook some broccoli? Because they're kind of different skill sets, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of steak and broccoli, what do you eat?
Steak and broccoli together is a really great combination.
I knew you were going to say that. I wasn't planning it that way, but once I said it, I'm like, duh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. We've been friends for many years, and I get just very playful when we hang out together. And basically, I think you've got to find what your system wants and needs now. Like, I'm at an age where I need more protein in my body, and the problem we gravitate a lot to the meat protein is many of us don't have. Meat is absorbed immediately as soon as it leaves the stomach. Whereas vegetable protein has to go through your GI tract, and your gut flora, your biome has to work. And if it's not working properly, you're not going to get that protein absorbed. You're better off eating the animal protein. But if you restore your gut flora, and there are peptides that will help you do that. BPC 157, amazing to help restore the gut. And then you don't just take probiotics, but you open your probiotic capsule, you rehydrate it in a glass of water before you drink it, so it doesn't rehydrate in your stomach and blow up because it's full of acid. So a lot of my diet is plant-based, very, very good carbs, very no processed carbs, except that I just had some blue tortilla chips this morning. I couldn't help myself, but primarily that. And then your animal products should be, really know where they come from. Because so much marketing right now, grass-fed means they're just putting a lot of grass truck into a feedlot, and so know where your meat, your eggs, and fish. I think that we grew up by the sea. Our body really resonates to fish. And then at the same time, you got to find out how to keep your mTOR, which is your aging clock, your biological clock, but keep that down. Because if you're eating bacon and burgers and a steak at night, it's going to drive mTOR up. You're going to age faster.
I've definitely, in fact, even in my longevity book, I talked about an excess of amino acids from animal protein, possibly increasing mTOR. And for listeners, mTOR causes tissues to grow, which is good for regeneration. But if it's always turned on, it increases cancer risk. And cancer is one of the things that's high on the list of what might take you out if you're not controlling for it.
Not only that, but excessive amino acids will turn into fat. You got to be in the right proportions, right balances, and which is where you were going next, I think.
Well, that can happen, but I looked at what raises mTOR, and you know what raises mTOR way more than animal protein?
Sugar.
Or carbs. You eat starch, it turns into sugar, right? So rice or sugar or fruit is going to raise mTOR more than beef. So how can you be plant-based to control mTOR when plants are made out of carbs? I don't understand it. Like, I'm not challenging. I'm just, like, I used to believe that, but it doesn't seem to be mechanistically how it works.
You know, I think that David Sinclair really upset a lot of people a couple of years ago when he came out that he was vegan.
Well, it doesn't work. People go vegan, including me. They get sick.
Yeah. And I think you got to find out what your body needs, but you got to really be able to do two things. One is that a lot of the protein we're eating is just going right through us because we're now going into autophagy. Every cell has a recycling bin. You know, your mitochondria dies, it puts it in the recycling bin. The body is designed to recycle. And if you can go into ketosis and go into autophagy, the recycling of these amazing proteins that have already differentiated into liver protein, into liver cells and heart cells, etc. And you can absorb your plant protein. You don't have to eat as much meat, but your body will tell you. Your body will guide you, and you need to find out what's best for you at this stage in your life, and what do you want to feed your gut so that they can, because that's where your immune system resides.
It's interesting where I ended up, both based on like the energetic intuition, felt sense, and also a lot of science. I'm not full carnivore because I have done that before. We called it carnivore, and I gave myself leaky gut and an egg allergy because I didn't have a lining for my gut after a long time. So I don't think that's the way to do it. But I eat limited plants and ones that digest cleanly and create a lot of plant toxins, and that seems to be there. But I'm also militant about 200 grams animal protein a day because I weigh 200 pounds. And when I do that and I can digest it, I'm 6% body fat. And I can eat or not eat. I just like, I'm so, well, dare I say bulletproof? When I do that, and so many people I know have tried it and they do lose weight and they put on muscle and it changes. So it's kind of confusing because there's a lot of information out there where, well, it should work. And you make some new research on things like mTOR, and I think demonizing animal protein is tough because you eat animal protein and you eat some plants. I eat animal protein in various degrees based on our genetics, whatever else, and I think that's where we end up. But not all plants are good, and not all animal protein is good.
No, I think that you turn it into dogma. It becomes dogma. So you got to find out what works for you, read the science. And it's not only about building muscle, but about using muscle. Like every year I still lead an expedition. I go to Peru for a month every year to work with the shamans. And every year I lead an expedition where we camp at 12,000 feet and hike up to 14,000. And I'm still doing it. I'm walking up the mountain, and you get breathless. You do hypoxic training, I like to call it.
Yep, we do it at Upgrade Labs now.
So that's the resilience. We need to build not only strength, we need to build resilience, immune resilience, spiritual resilience, emotional resilience, physical. At all of these levels, we neglect one of the levels. We neglect the emotional in favor of the physical only. I have friends of mine that are just in the gym because they don't want to deal with their dysfunctional marriages.
That's a really powerful statement, Alberto. There are people who self-medicate, especially with cardio, but it can also be with weights, where it's just easier to deal with the body than the heart and the mind.
Yeah.
With your own growing of a new brain, did you have to take your brain to the gym? Did you have to do weird things to grow it back to stimulate it?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think that you got to take your your brain to the gym, and not just to the gym. You got to find some endurance sport, like whether it be jogging or bicycling or swimming. For me, it's swimming. Something that is just going to allow your mind to go into the space of everywhere and nowhere, and then you got to challenge yourself. Pick up a new language, learn to play an instrument, play Scrabble. My wife and I play Scrabble together, and she's amazing because English is a second language for her, but she beats me all the time. But I decided to work with the Scrabble board upside down because I wanted to see new relationships and things. So I play upside down now. So I'm exercising my brain. We've outsourced a lot of our brain to our digital devices. And when we were kids, we knew everybody's phone number. I don't even know my own phone number now. So you gotta take your brain out to a workout, and you remember that there are four different brains, and each one of them works out differently. There's a reptilian brain stem, and breathing practice is the best thing to exercise that brain. For us, breathing is an autonomic function. For dolphins, it isn't. That's why half of their brain sleeps. And a dolphin can commit suicide by holding their breath. We cannot, but we can retrain that brain to not go into panic mode when we do exercises that build up the CO2 in our system, for example, without it triggering panic.
You mean you could just breathe in a paper bag for a little while the way they used to 50 years ago for anxiety?
Well, yeah. The breathing works on the basis of CO2 concentration, not oxygen.
Right.
When CO2 levels in the blood get to a certain threshold, you begin to hyperventilate, you go into panic. And that's why that breathing meditation is one of many that you find around the world. But if you can teach your body if you can hold your breath, learn to, hold your breath underwater, for example. That's a big one. I used to hold my breath for 2 minutes when I was 20, and I was a swimmer and a scuba diver. Now I'm 50 years older, and I can hold my breath for 3 minutes underwater. But you got to go through that point where you think you're going to die. And that's why befriending death and going through that point that triggers all the survival, that's a learning edge. That's amazing. Yeah. What I do today is I train people in energy medicine. I tend to becoming modern shamans, neuro shamans. And so I tell them to, in the middle of winter, to go and take a nice hot shower in the morning and then turn the faucet all the way to cold. But what you do is just put your hand on the faucet and don't turn it. Just notice what your body begins to go through. It's already beginning to experience the suffering. That's suffering. And then after a few seconds, turn it all the way to cold. And when you turn it all the way to cold, that's pain. And then you learn the difference between suffering and pain. Suffering happens before and after. Pain is what's going on when you got that shot of cold water. And then don't muscle your way through it. Don't willpower your way through it. Feel it. Experience it. Breathe into it. Feel that you're getting blessed by, these are the waters that run deep beneath the earth that are coming through a waterfall, just a cascade upon you as nature washing, create a really positive story around it. Then you're rewiring the brain, creating new neural networks around what we perceived as pain.
So I'm doing all right. I get in the cold plunge, and I've been meditating on the blood of my enemies. And you're saying that's not how to do it? I'm kidding. I don't meditate on anyone's blood. But yeah, it's welcoming the sensation rather than fighting it, and then it doesn't hurt anymore. And that's when your dopamine receptors like, oh yeah, okay. Like I don't have to resist discomfort, but it's different. You see some people, 45 minutes a day, every day, you gotta, rock while you're walking on ground up glass, and it doesn't take that much time. And it's about intensity, and it's about your state during the intensity versus grit, which is also valuable. Grit is important, but grit depletes willpower. And I'm talking about giving you more willpower so you can have more grit later if you need it.
Yeah. And grit frequently will override systems instead of enhancing the systems that you want to enhance. Being able to sit with the uncomfortable. even at the emotional level. We're talking about the physical level, but at the emotional, we call that jaguar medicine. At the level of jaguar, you got to sit with uncomfortable feelings. Your partner's saying something that you want to hide from. We guys talk about our feelings for about 3 minutes and not 3 hours.
That's the 3 minutes of pain I was talking about. I'm with you.
Yeah. So you're sitting with the uncomfortable and breathing into it and not trying to hide from it and not trying to deflect it and just simply being with it. And it's amazing how quickly this energy dissipates of anger or fear or resentment towards someone, usually somebody you love dearly. And then you got to do it at a higher level, which is the kind of the spiritual level. What is your mission? What are you coming here to do? Are you coming to, what's driving you? What do you wake up in the morning to? So and there you got to ask the 3 questions that every spiritual tradition posits, which are, who am I? Where do I come from? And where am I going?
So fascinating. Alberto, thanks for your new Grow a New Brain book and for just sharing this very unique but meaningful and scientific perspective. It's this cool blend of your mindset and things like NRF2 and CERT and these other longevity compounds that we talk about on the show. So you've blended them in a new and unique way that I think only you could do, given that you're the Western guy who went to the jungle and stayed for a long time when you couldn't find the drugs you wanted. So you have this amazing story of your life, and this is a masterful work. And thanks for coming back on the show, and I cannot wait to hang out with you in Santa Fe again.
Thank you, Dave. Looking forward to seeing you as well. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Guys, go buy Grow a New Brain by Alberto Villoldo. If you'd like to get that perspective on, well, science and spirit, they can both coexist. In fact, I dare you to do one without the other and see how well it works. See you on the next episode.
See you next time on the Human Upgrade Podcast.